So I'm going to go ahead and assume that I am on air because I can't see any difference. So I'm trusting Robert. First of all, thank you so much for volunteering here, Robert French. Without you, this would be much harder. So thank you all for coming. This is Talking to Myself, lessons learned from presenting online. And I'm going to tell you all about who I am in a bit, but I'm going to start with one of the most important slides in this slide deck, and that is this one. And I want to thank all our sponsors, because without the sponsors, nothing like this would ever be possible. So again, thank you so much for the sponsors. And if you can or do, go check out their sessions and check out their information. Let's kick this off. So 2020 had started very well. I mean, in early March, I had spoken at conferences in Sweden, in Norway, in Scotland, yes, Scottish Summit, and Finland. I had taught 5 courses, one of which had an amazing, completely new format. I was on a roll, and my calendar was crammed, absolutely chock full of conferences and courses all over the world. And then the world ended. So in-person events were being canceled left and right, and several courses were coming up. I had done some speaking for user groups and the like from home, but I had always seen that as a less desirable and, to be absolutely frank, a very poor alternative to speaking in person. Suddenly that didn't matter, because I no longer had the choice of doing anything in person. I needed to figure out how to get my shit together and teach and speak from home without sucking. That was easier said than done, and I needed to think outside the box and take a page from a group of people that might not be the first to come to mind. I'm talking about streamers. Yes, gaming streamers on YouTube, for instance. So this session is a summary of what I've learned so far, but don't let that fool you into thinking that this is the only way to do things. This is one way, not the way. We're going to discuss the challenges inherent with speaking online, because this is somewhat different from what you've been doing so far. We're going to look at what is basically required and recommended technology. They are not the same. And we're going to look at how the online speaking is different from speaking, well, I should say offline, but speaking from the stage. When you're a speaker or a trainer, well, that's large enough of a hat in its of its own. I mean, you not only need to be a technical expert in your field, but you need to be able to craft a story to convey your message, as well as make things interesting for your audience. Imagine then having to wear 3 more hats: the hat of a producer, moderator, and Teams expert, or whatever kind of platform you're using. My goal today is to give you some ideas and tips for upping your online speaking game. My name is Alexander. I have 23 years in IT, pretty much all of it spent with data, databases, and or infrastructure in some way, shape, or form. These days, I work for a company in Sweden called Solution Experts, and I am a principal solutions architect, which, by the way, is the best title I've ever had, because nobody knows what I do. Now, the funny thing is, it's easy to explain, because I make data matter, because only data that matters can truly inspire any change. And I do this by going, well, I should say I used to do this by going all over the world to speak, teach courses, and do consulting. But these days I am very much stuck here, which is my home. I'm one of 7 data platform MVPs in Sweden. I co-host a fairly large podcast called Knee Deep in Tech. And yes, for the people in my age, that is the Doom game logo. This is a shot of me from this summer flying a motor glider, which is a kind of a light aircraft. I'm flying under what's known as visual flight rules, or VFR. And that means that I will keep my eyes outside of the cockpit, using what I can see around me as reference. I can see where I am, I can see where I'm going and I can judge distance, altitude, speed, and anything else that I need to safely fly and hopefully land the aircraft. I am basically flying by the seat of my pants, and I rely on my instincts and my experience to get from point A to point B. And this is a pretty good analogy for a session on a stage because I can see my audience. I can judge the mood. I can judge the mood in the room. And I can instantly see if someone is trying to ask a question. Some of you might not realize that a lot of speakers do the equivalent of hop in the airplane and go. Now, that might work on stage if you're experienced enough. Experience can somewhat compensate for preparation, even though you might find yourself in situations that you could have avoided had you actually prepared thoroughly enough. I'm not a friend of doing anything ad hoc. But there's another kind of flying, though. This is called instrument flight rules, or IFR for short. In this case, you're in the clouds. You can't see your wingtips, let alone where you're at, where you're going, or if someone else is coming your way. In fact, if you do look outside, you're likely to lose spatial awareness as your body will be telling you one thing, but your eyes another. It's very, very difficult to learn how to fly an airplane using only the instruments. Your eyes are stuck inside the cockpit, and your body might be telling that you're in a bank when, in fact, you're not. The funny thing is, when I learned to fly gliders many, many years ago, I had to do a familiarization flight on instruments. With my gyro instruments taped over and my instructor in the back seat, we went into the milky white clouds. My airplane, he said. I took my hands off the controls and he explained that we'd spent about 30 seconds in the cloud, so my brain was thoroughly confused, and then we'd exit and call it a day. He handed the airplane back to me with the terse, "Your airplane, get us out of here." So I did what I was expected to do. I gently banked the airplane all the way to the left and pushed the nose forward a bit to descend. Then all hell broke loose as the bottom basically went out from underneath me. My altimeter started spinning and we were rapidly descending, and my speed was equally rapidly increasing. So I pulled on my stick to stop the descent, but instead I felt the G's start to pile on, and my speed just kept on rising. My airplane, I heard from the back, as we broke through the clouds, almost inverted. He had slowly rolled the airplane from the moment he took control, and I hadn't realized it. He gave me back control of an airplane, rolled almost 90 degrees to the left, and that put me in a bit of a bind. I had no chance of recovering the aircraft at that moment. I was doomed. And this is kind of what doing a session online can set you up for. So let's start with the obvious. You can't see anyone. This talking to myself is weird. Just like flying in the clouds, you can't see outside. So why is that a problem? Well, in order to understand and answer that, we need to take a step back and look at why we're on stage in the first place. You see, I'm here to teach. Be it a course or a session, I'm having my trainer hat on. I want to make sure that the information that I provide is received and understood in the best possible way. And I need to keep my audience engaged, and I need to ensure that the audience is happy. In order to do that, I need to control a few variables. For starters, I need to control the information. Well, that's easy. I wrote the session. The second one is I need to control the delivery. Well, that's also fairly easy if I know what I'm doing. And then I need to control my audience. That is not easy, even if I'm in front of it. A skilled speaker uses the audience as an instrument. It doesn't sound very nice, but that's what we do because we listen to the subtle clues as we go through the session, and we adjust ever so slightly to accommodate the specifics of the audience, venue, or anything else that might come into play. I'm sure you've all been to a session when everything just clicks. The speaker is relaxed and engaged. The room is dead silent in anticipation of the next sentence, and boredom is nowhere to be found. That is exceedingly difficult to pull off on any normal day, and just about impossible to do via video. It can be done, but it requires way more preparation and practice. So let's start to unpack this and see where we end up. Let's start with the setup. From one day to the next, I had to figure out how to teach a course online. For once, I was lucky to have bought way too much audio equipment for the podcast that I'm hosting. Yeah, I have a lot of stuff just lying around. My other two podcast hosts and we were talking about perhaps adding video to the podcast, but we never figured out quite how. Well, I was out of time because I needed a good audio, I needed good video, and I needed a way to get my students to get on board with the training. Now, my first setup was modest. Well, this is, strictly speaking, the only thing you'll need. But it will be rather flat and dull. I'm sorry to say that. I presented an introduction to Azure infrastructure this way, and I knew after 15 minutes that I need to make changes. A lot of changes. We were running Teams, so the audience saw my shared PowerPoint and my small face, yeah, this one, all the way down in the corner and almost out of view. The good thing was that the audio was fine due to my pretty decent headset, but yeah, that was about it. I'm fairly sure that the majority of my students fell asleep, as many of the Microsoft slides do leave something to be desired in the excitement department. Yeah, what? Oh, sorry. And this brings me to my first serious important point. Audio is by far the most important aspect of speaking or training online. Everything else is nice to have, but good audio is absolute need to have. The problem with good audio is that it consists of so many parts. Let's start with the most obvious one. That is the microphone. Yeah, but it doesn't stop there, because we need to consider a mixer if we have one of those, the space we're physically in, and the proper technique for using a microphone. That would probably be a whole session in and of itself, but I'll just say that proper techniques makes a huge difference for the audience. So let's start with the simple part first, the technical aspects of the microphone. I have a few blog posts on the different kinds of microphones, and there are basically three kinds. You have the dynamic, the condenser, and the ribbon microphones. Of those, you never have to worry about the ribbon microphones, as they are exceedingly rare, even in the audio industry. I won't bore you to tears with the details of the dynamic and condenser microphones, but just know that they behave rather differently when it comes to how they work and how they pick up sound, especially ambient sound and sound around you. Then we have the style of the microphone. Some people prefer a boom style microphone, like the one that I'm wearing right now. Some prefer the radio presenter style of full-size microphone, like the one I use for the podcast. Some might prefer a lavalier or clip-on mic, and some might prefer a shotgun mic mounted just out of frame. All of these are great alternatives. You just need to figure out what works for you, for your voice, and for your space. Speaking of the room, audio is hard, and room reverb is very hard. I've treated my room with heavy drapes, several acoustic panels on the walls and in the ceiling, as well as a pretty heavy rug to absorb some of the sound waves bouncing around. Oh, no. That's not my room. No. But a picture of a studio to give you an idea of just how much treatment is needed for really good audio. I'm lucky in the sense that I've got a room in my apartment where I can do these things. Most people can't. And that brings us back to the importance of finding a combination of a microphone and a style that works for the space you're in. I can give you some very basic tips. I prefer a dynamic microphone to a condenser one due to the condensers being more sensitive and thus more likely to pick up room reverb, making the audio sound echoey. I also prefer a boom like the one I'm wearing right now for speaking, as it is not in my face the same way as a big microphone. Yeah, like this one would be. Finally, when we're talking about microphones, there is the point of interfaces. Either we can run with just straight USB and plug it into the computer. Well, that's easy. Then off you go. There are some great USB microphones, and no, the Blue Yeti is not one of them, especially headset mounted ones like the Jabra range of headsets. They work fine. But if you want more control or use a microphone that does not have a USB interface like this one, then you also need to consider an XLR to USB interface or a mixer. There are plenty of mixers and interfaces that do the job, but I highly recommend the Go XLR or the Focusrite Scarlett or the Motu series. Those are just fantastic. And I bet that the thing that most people think of when the subject of good video comes up is buying a new expensive camera. While the step up from a cheaper Logitech something something or similar to a DSLR like a Sony a6100 or a 5100 or something like, well, it will provide better video for sure. There are a few things most often overlooked here. What if I told you that the single thing that makes the most difference for good video has nothing to do with the camera itself? It's all about the lights. I used to do photography as a hobby many years ago, and I learned about lights the hard way. I can tell you many ways that I cannot light the scene, for instance. You see, without proper lighting, the camera has to try a lot of tricks to get a good picture. And, well, there's only so much latitude that it has. A good camera with poor lighting would give you way worse quality than a decent camera with good lighting. So my second top tip here is lighting is absolute key. You can almost not have too much of it. In fact, I have two lights coming in from 45 degrees and from slightly above. And I'll show you what happens if I turn them off. It looks like this. Yeah. What's even more funny is that I have a green screen behind me. So yeah, not very nice, is it? Yeah, let's turn them back on. With the audio sorted, let's look at the next step up with video. While a decent webcam with good lighting will get you farther than most people realize, to really get fantastic video, you need to either go to a camcorder or a digital single lens reflex or a DSLR camera, such as the very popular Sony Alpha series. Make sure that the camera you choose can output so-called clean HDMI. That would be an HDMI signal without the overlay of all the settings in the camera, like what you see through the viewfinder. While we're at it, don't forget the lens. The kit lens that usually comes with the camera is, well, it isn't bad, but it's nowhere near as good as a fast, what's known as a prime lens, such as the Sigma 16mm f1.4. That's what I'm using here. It is fantastic. Let me show you what the difference between a Logitech camera and my Sony is. Because if I do this, we are now using my normal camera. But if I go to my other camera, this is the same background, but I'm now using a Logitech camera. It's okay, but it's nowhere near as good as my normal camera. The next surprise that tend to kick in when you're considering a DSLR camera is that the majority of them won't behave like a webcam. That means that they're difficult to hook up to the computer without a specialized HDMI to USB connector. And the funny thing is that the market is pretty much cornered by one company, and that would be Elgato and their products. They're absolutely great, but they're expensive. Thankfully, several DSLR manufacturers have started to offer firmware upgrades for their cameras so they do behave like webcams. Just connect them through USB and voila, you have one heck of an upgrade. Here's a rather novel way of getting good video without having to buy a new camera. Many people have fairly decent cell phones. Even the cheapest cell phone have probably an exceptional camera, so why not use that? And speaking of expensive, the lights don't have to be expensive either. Anything with a decent output will do, but the more you pay, the more flexibility you will get. With good audio and good video sorted, it's time to think about how to make everything come together. Remember that we need to keep people actually interested? Well, in order to do that, we need to look at fitting ourselves with a producer hat. The producer hat is responsible for changing camera angles, cutting scenes, and overall keeping things interesting, all while supporting and enhancing the theme of the content. A bad producer can easily destroy pacing and consistency, while a great one can easily make the things feel seamless and absolutely fantastic. Unfortunately, you're the producer as well. Right. Crap. So there's several pieces of software available, most notable being vMix or the Open Broadcast Studio, OBS. I'm using OBS simply because it's free and it works absolutely fine for me. I have friends that swear by vMix, and I'm sure there are other software out there that can do the job just as well. So in OBS, I build what's known as scenes, and this is where I combine my video sources and my audio sources to output into the virtual webcam, which is basically what you're seeing right now. And I can make multiple scenes as well, and I can switch between them on the fly. The video sources can be other things than a camera. It can, for instance, be a window like this, or this. This way we can construct all the scenes in order to handle demos without any messy screen sharing and an alt tabbing and all that crap. However, switching between the scenes can be somewhat tedious. The way that requires no extra nothing is switching inside of OBS itself, but that means that I need to have that window up and I need to click around. It works, but it's a bit clunky. You could get software for your smartphone to give you extra buttons for your scenes, or you can try what's known as a Stream Deck, which this is a special kind of keyboard. It's basically a set of buttons that you configure to your heart's content. And then you just need to click. There is a fourth option, though, pioneered by Scott Hanselman. Using a small piece of software to interface OBS and PowerPoint, it's possible to automatically switch between OBS scenes based on your current PowerPoint slide. It takes some getting used to, but it can be very neat and smooth. That's what I'm using right now to magically switch between the scenes and the output of the camera when I go between my slides. We're perhaps missing one thing for the ultimate setup. That would be a green screen. With a green screen, we can insert ourselves into the presentation so the audience can see your body language, facial expression, and maybe one of the cats walking by. There's a reason I've closed my door, because otherwise they would be here. In fact, I am using a green screen right now. Let me show you. Yep, that's what it looks like. That's where I'm standing. What's even more funny is that this is my room. This is what it looks like, but I put it on a picture and use that as a background. It confuses the heck out of my colleagues whenever I do a video meeting. I can guarantee you that much. And I told you that OBS uses virtual cameras to replace your webcam. That means that it becomes necessary to consider how to share your screen and such in a tool. How do you usually share stuff in, for instance, Team or Zoom? Well, you click share and then you decide on which window to share, right? Well, with OBS, this behavior changes, and it is very, very obvious in Restream, which is the platform we're using here. Because I'm sharing the same video output as my camera is creating, and that is making especially Restream a bit confused because it's the same video feed. The solution in this case for me is to share the output of OBS to a secondary or tertiary screen and then share that. That's what I've been doing. And that is why you're seeing the teeny tiny version of me up there is exactly the same as this. Unfortunately, in Restream, if we were to shut that thing off, my audio would go the way of the dodo as well. Let's just say that I have some feedback for Restream after this session. Now, I've got 3 screens. One is a cheap 10-inch yo-yo monitor, which is the only reason for having is to be able to put PowerPoint on it. So I'm having a small screen with the PowerPoint that you're seeing right now, this one. And having that one means that I can use PowerPoint's presenter mode on my main screen, which is in front of me. And then I have the tertiary monitor, the small one, in a teleprompter right in your face, basically. So this is pretty much how everything is connected together. This is the easy one, and this is the more complex one. There's also the discussion of using a normal Teams meeting or a webinar style meeting where attendees can't speak. I've tried both for conferences, training, and user group meetups. And I personally find that a normal Teams meeting where people can unmute and ask questions or comment is my choice for style whenever I'm doing anything in a smaller setting. Now, I will say that I have had some issues, and I'm going to get into that in a bit. But for the most part, seeing people and having them be able to participate in the session outweighs the potential issues that you might find yourself in. Finally, we come to the less than fun aspects of the tech. Because I said in the beginning that you have to wear multiple hats. Not only are you presenting, but you need to be the producer responsible for switching video input and camera angles. You're your own technician, and you have to rely on, well, you have to be able to juggle the Teams chat simultaneously. I'll be absolutely frank. Can't be done. Well, at least I can't do it. I'm sure there are Übermensch that can. I can't. You have to rely on help or just blind luck, as I can't think of a way to do all these things at the same time with any semblance of good quality. The more we can automate, the better, but be prepared for the fact that the workload for an online speaker is vastly increased compared to walking on stage at a conference. Everything is just laid out for us. We have everything to go. You plug in the computer. Hopefully, you get to share the screen, and off you go to the races. Here, not so much. Everything just needs to work. The complexity is enormous. Just factor in a small technical glitch, and the whole house of cards come falling down. Issues that I've run into are everything from the obvious ones, Teams or whatever stream platform we're using not working, the audio or video being choppy, people not seeing my shared content for one reason or the other, Windows deciding to update in the middle of a presentation. Yes, this is still a huge issue, even when working from home. But I've also had issues related to the amount of technology I use. My Stream Deck decided on a whim to just disconnect. My lights started blinking. My mixer wouldn't respond, and OBS got confused with resolutions. All these things are difficult to troubleshoot at the best of times. And when you're actively presenting, you have no business even trying to. Just don't. Instead, make sure that you have a fallback plan, a tested, rehearsed, and ready fallback plan that can be implemented literally at a moment's notice. Have a secondary headset, have a secondary computer, have a secondary everything. And just like your backup and restore plans, if you're working as a DBA, test them and make sure that they work, because nothing is more useless than having all the stuff ready to go and it doesn't work. There are other interesting problems that crop up with online presentation as well. Problems that are not that common at a conference. Rarely have I had to ask someone to leave for being unable to be quiet, but this seems to be a bigger issue with online platforms. We get to learn a few key phrases such as, "Can you hear me? What about now? Can you see my screen? And please mute," or "You're muted." And I have had someone loudly play porn during one of my presentations at a user group. That is kind of uncommon at a live conference. So, In summary, for the technical part, always have a fallback plan. Whenever I go to speak, I have two PCs and all my slides and demos in my OneDrive, just in case something happens. Working from home, you might look at 4G if your network works, a secondary computer, and whatever else you can duplicate. If the lights go out or power is lost to your house, well, that'll be the end of that session. There's no point in overspending, but there is a need to spend your money wisely. Buy the right things and not necessarily just the cool brands. Tech is fun, but tech you can't use is useless. So only use technology you're comfortable with. And that means test it, and test it again. So that was the technical part. Let's go on to the how do you adapt your speaking style and speaking skills? Well, have you walked into a room and immediately felt that something was off? You don't know what, you don't know why, but you know something is not quite right. That's a difficult starting position for any speaker, as the absolute key aspect of presentation skills is to be sensitive. And as a speaker, I need to be sensitive to my audience. And that means looking for telltale clues in their faces, postures or eyes, listening to coughs, laughs, snorts, or any other sounds, as well as a general feel of the room. Humans tend to mirror movements and behaviors of people we trust or are otherwise engaged with. And that's why I can build a rapport with the live audience by mirroring some of the behaviors and basically have people mirror me. In essence, it doesn't matter how good you are at speaking if you can't listen. The problem is, in an online session, I am about as deaf as a doornail. There are several ways to combat this, and the most obvious one is to give up. But unfortunately, I'm not very good at that, so we need to find another alternative. So, where are we going to look? Well, the eyes. It is extremely important to have the presenter look into the camera. That is much better than looking down or looking to the side. It kind of, it doesn't give you the same connection, really. It's a bit creepy at first. I mean, just where do you think the session name comes from? I need to figure out a way to walk around. I only have this much space to walk around in, but I can still use that to good effect and do so. And of course, we need to add in some spices. I've changed my pace, I've changed my pitch, I've moved around. You've seen me do a few things, but they're almost the same things as we do on-prem, if you will, on stage. Another thing that we need to think about is ergonomics. When was the last time you saw a presenter sit on stage? I've been using a standing desk for many, many years, and for me, it is way more natural to stand when I present than to sit when I present. I have more room to move around. I can use a body in a more expressive way than I can if I'm sitting down. And as we'll see in a short bit, I need every chance I get to keep my audience actively engaged. Then we have the question of ergonomics in general. I've done more than 25 presentations and courses from home in 2020 alone, and I'm coming over 10 already in 2021. These presentations are just an hour or 45 minutes, but as any speaker can attest to, that hour is very, very intensive. The courses are way longer, up to 10 days. And if I were to sit at my desk for 7 hours straight every day, my back would just up and leave. So do think about ergonomics. Your body will thank you. And as I said previously, audience interaction is a huge part of a presentation. And as a speaker, I basically play my audience in order to create a symphony. But when you can't interact easily with people, what do you do? How do you gauge activity, retention, general wakefulness? Hi, is this thing on? Well, I'll tell you what I can't do. I can't just ask the question, ask the audience a question, because for starters, people need to figure out if I'm asking a rhetorical question or not. And that is going to completely mess up any and all timing. Then they need to unmute, and probably a lot of people are going to be unmuting at the same time, and calamity ensues. So yeah, and there's also the question of timing. There is, it's going to be difficult to make sure that my timing is working if I start to bring in interruptions, if you will. I highly recommend you, if you have the screen real estate, to use the PowerPoint presenter mode. I'm using that, and I have a lot of supporting text. I'm not reading verbatim, but I have a lot of supporting words to make sure that I remember what I'm doing, and I can try to keep track of what I'm doing. And especially if you can, bring on a moderator to help you keep track of any questions in a chat, for instance. The moderator is absolutely gold, and the next time you meet a moderator, hug them or give them a cookie or whatever, because they are phenomenally awesome people. Thank you, Rob. You're doing a great job. So, doing online sessions have a number of problems. Some are obvious and some are more subtle and won't show immediately. The most obvious one is that you're relying on a good internet connection. I have 250 megabits of fiber. It's stable and it has great round trip performance. This might not be the case everywhere. So, um, just a few months ago, another speaker of the community, Nico Jacobs, he was doing a complete pre-con from his office when the fire alarm went off. He spent the next 2 hours teaching the rest of the pre-con from his car using 4G. Now, that is extreme, but it does happen, and he completely knocked it out of the park. While we're on the subject of time, we have the funny concept of time zones. I am at GMT +1 or +2, depending on if we're on daylight saving time or not. The conference in question might not be. This one isn't, for instance. Trying to present late at night or early morning can really throw me off my game. I kid you not. So, in order to, no, let me say one more thing. Finally, we have a rather unexpected problem that has started to crop up. Several speakers, myself included, have started to feel burnout from doing the same session over and over and over again. The pandemic has really done a number on most of us, and unfortunately, every virtual conference I do, well, I did last year and do this year, reminds me of the physical meetings that I will not have for the foreseeable future. And the sheer number of virtual conferences that have cropped up is just insane. I used to do speaking a lot, and a lot meant that I maybe did 2 of them every month, meaning that I go to the airport, I fly somewhere, I go to the venue, I do my thing, and I go back home. Here I can do 3 on the same day without basically breaking a sweat. And that is not a good thing. One would probably think that it means that there is more content for the audience. Yes, but I would argue that the quality of the content is not as good as it could be. And I have a lot of negative things to say about recording the content from sessions like this. Food for thought. So the takeaways from how to actually present online is, for instance, consider help if it is available. You can't do everything on your own. Uh, get someone to answer questions. Get someone to keep track of questions. If it is, if you know that you have a hard time figuring out what time it is and keeping on time, don't be hesitant to just ask someone to keep track of that for you. This is not like doing a session on stage because you can't wing it. You're not playing the audience the same way. You don't get anything back. When I'm on stage with people in front of me, it's basically a game of ping pong. I do something and I gauge the reaction, and it gives me direction, and it gives me focus. It gives me energy. Here, well, I have to find that basically in my camera. And I dearly like my camera, but not in the same way. and tailor your delivery to the specific environment. For 1 hour sessions, you don't need to worry so much about pauses. But if you're doing a pre-con or a course, that changes pretty darn quickly. Likewise, you'll need to spice things up and shift between demos and slides if you're doing something longer. So, in summary, just like flying on instruments, the technology gives you the framework to be able to, but it won't do it for you. You're going to need to prepare because going flying on a beautiful sunny day requires extensive preparation in and of itself. I mean, you need to plan the route, the fuel, the account for weather and then potential issues and such. But flying on instruments require an order of magnitude more preparation. You might not be able to get where you're going, and it requires you in turn to plan accordingly. Losing an instrument or a radio is no longer a nuisance. It is a potential life and death situation. Now, it's not quite as bad when you're presenting online, but it is definitely a potential disaster. And don't believe someone that says that speaking or teaching online is the same as doing it in front of a live audience. And especially not someone that says, well, recording it is easy. Just do it as you always do. I'm sorry to say, that is bullshit. During this 45 minutes, you've seen why, and that is not the case. And while the craft is the same, the application of the craft is very, very different, just like flying. So, my goal was to give you some thoughts and tips for figuring out how to wear multiple hats, which is always fun, and thus upping your online speaking game. With this knowledge, you're now ready to call yourself an online speaking unicorn. Yeah, I'm sorry. It's a horrible thing, but that's kind of what you get. Because when you really, really get to grips with this online speaking gig, you can go from just another talking head in the corner or wherever you put yourself to something different. And I think everybody owes it to the audience to make something different, to really make an effort. Anybody could just click through a PowerPoint, but there's so much more to do. So don't be afraid to do it. I've been through a lot, and I haven't even gone through the most technical details. If there's anything you want to ask me, just uh, quite do so. I'll give you my information in just a bit. The world as we know it pretty much ended in March of 2020. It'll get back to its feet, I'm sure, but nobody knows when or in what shape it'll be when it does. Every speaker and trainer that I know has had to learn to fly on instruments, so to speak, regardless if they wanted to or not. It's not easy, but with the proper training and practice, it can be done. And just like flying on a beautiful, clear day is fantastic, completing a flight under instrument conditions can be equally fun and rewarding. Now you have some new skills. Find what works for you, go practice, and have a safe flight. My name is Alexander, and I thank you so much for your time. Right. Rob, do we have any questions? Trying to figure out how to see the chat.